Right, now for a story that contains sexually explicit details and is not for young viewers. More details have emerged of alleged abuse at Parktown Boys High in Johannesburg. In 2016, an assistant water polo coach, Colin Rex, was arrested. In 2018, he was found guilty of 144 counts of sexual assault. Author Sam Cowen has spoken to many of the survivors in her new book called Brutal School Ties. At the same time, a matron at Parktown Boys has now spoken out about abuse before and even after Rex's arrest, and a culture that allows older boys to routinely abuse younger boys. Mariolette Bossert spoke exclusively to Talk Radio 702, and some of her claims were aired this morning on the Eusebius Mckaiser show. We'll speak to him shortly. Let's first take a look at what Bossert had to say, things like waterboarding used on younger boys.
They used to put the boys in a cupboard, and then they a little grade 8, then they lock the cupboard, they fill it up with water, and when this boy feels like he's drowning, that makes him a man. And my son still said to him, that is torture. I've never heard of something like that.
Then she talks of a video. Bossert said she had seen herself showing sexual abuse at the hands of Colin Rex.
Suddenly, there was like 6, 7 boys on the footage, and it was like a normal day at school. And he was moving from the one boy to another boy, doing sexual acts with him, like it's normal. And when I saw the footage, I was so shocked. I even said to the boy, you cannot go tell anyone, because, me and Mr. B must first investigate this. And he said to me, oh, ma'am, this is Rex's way. He does it to all of us.
According to Bossert, Rex played a game with the boys that he called 50 Shades of Grey in reference to the sexually explicit book of the same name. Let's take a listen.
He had this thing about 50 Shades of Grey that he used to do to the boys, the way he used to carry them, tie them up, and then he had to use this game where he played, they had to tap out where he put a belt around their necks. I mean, I personally rushed the boy to hospital that had marks around his neck, and the boy told me it was a tie, and this is one of the sexual games that Rex played with him.
Well, Mckaiser asked her about why she didn't come forward earlier. Bossert alleges that she received death threats from a number of Parktown boys, from members of the school governing body, and that she did make an attempt to lay charges. Well, to discuss, we're now joined by the talk show host himself, Eusebius Mckaiser. Eusebius, great to have you with us as always. Although this story, I mean, so many shocking, horrific details had already emerged. Hearing you this morning, it sounds like you couldn't believe the further details you were hearing. Just tell us what it was like to engage with this matron.
Good evening, Francis, to you and to the viewers. It was horrific. I did not even share with my listeners on 702 more than maybe 5% of the material in my position, because from a media ethics and a legal point of view, triangulation, as you know, is important with excellent journalism. If I had the opportunity to serialize what I had and do further work, the public could be even more shocked. So what we aired this morning, as horrific as it is just the tip of the iceberg. And the key insight really for me, Francis, is that we should not exceptionalize one bad assistant water polo coach. It is fantastic that he is behind bars. But in a sense, schools invest in PR campaigns, and we must call BS on those campaigns. The reality is the entire system is rotten. There is institutional culpability, and that needs to be spoken about. And very often, when one particular teacher gets their comeuppance in terms of some ethical consequence or even criminal consequence for them, like with Mr. Colin Rex, the school hopes that it can then successfully sell the message that it got rid of the bad apple. Parktown Boys High is not a school that had a bad apple. It is a rotten institution.
Yeah. I mean, let's stay with that, because she talks about teachers who are certainly no example at all. And then it sounds like the older boys, before, after Rex, for years, just had this incredible free reign, the older boys to abuse younger boys. Is that the big picture that you're getting?
That's absolutely right. So there's a couple of features here in terms of understanding the dynamic of how this kind of culture takes root in an institution. The first is normalization. So for a lot of the matric boys, the behavior exhibited by teachers, by hostel masters, is behavior that they internalize, and they then abuse their own power in relation to grade 8 boys who were much weaker and much younger than themselves, which is why you have this incredible scene in one of the scenes with the CCTV footage where a number of boys are in the common area in the hostel, and no one flinches, even though this monstrous man is spraying on each one of the boys. And what that tells you is behavior had become habituated. The second is we don't teach our boys how to speak out. We don't give them permission psychically to do so. We don't empower them with the right kind of vocabulary psychologically to have the confidence to speak out. And when you stack up all the disincentives to speak out when it comes to boys and men for that matter, then the culture of silence is perpetuated from one generation to another.
Yeah. I remember being so surprised that none of the boys had come forward. I mean, this all blew open initially because of a videotape that somebody looked at. Eusebius, do you suspect that this culture of silence that you talk about, I mean, it must be in other schools as well?
I am not convinced that Parktown Boys High story is unique to the school. I think it is an exemplar of what happens in South African schools in general, and in particular in many of our elite schools, Francis. Last week I focused on my radio show on institutional racism at elite South African schools. Similarly, the culture of bullying, initiation, all of that continues and has been entrenched. And it's founded on a very toxic masculinist idea of what good education and good pedagogy is about, particularly if you end up in the hostel as a boarder in one of these schools as well. And there is a problem here that is generalizable across South African experiences, and I've seen it in the way in which the public have responded to this story. Many have written me about their own stories at many other famous South African schools. But of course, what the schools do is they pump literally hundreds of thousands of rands into PR campaigns that suggest we are this amazing institution, 100+ histories. Look at these old boys. This one played for the Springboks. That one managed to get an award for a couple of novels. But what they don't tell you are the things that you don't find in the brochures, such as what happens after dark in a hostel. And we can draw a link between gender-based violence that we're focusing on the show this evening and what the president focused on, rightly so, in his speech last night, and what happens in our schools. If early on you already learn the social grammar of violence in high school, it is little wonder that you end up murdering and raping women 20 years later.
Yeah. Well, thank you for making that link. I think it's so important. And you speak about this in terms of systemic abuse. I mean, I remember even years before there was an initiation scandal at Parktown Boys. So there was something of a spotlight. And you've spoken to a myriad of experts. Just tell us what they're saying about how this can be done, even with that public spotlight to some extent on the school.
The problem is that when the public spotlight happens, we treat it as an event rather than as uncovering a culture. And that matters, Francis, because if your description of the problem is wrong, then selection for the intervention will be the wrong toolkits. So, for example, in 2016, November, this man gets arrested. If you treat him as an event, as a rotten apple, then you're not going to ask tough questions such as, were we complicit in the leadership of the school? Was management complicit? What about other teachers? What about the role of the, for example, the SGB? What about the education department? What about the MEC? Did he do enough? You're not going to ask critical questions about institutional culpability and how to fix the systemic issues if you have the wrong description of the problem. Yeah. So the reason why 2009 happened and then 2016 happened and then Enoch Mpianzi could happen at the beginning of this year is because the responses to each of these events were the wrong set of responses. Every time there's a crisis in a South African school, it's not treated as a systemic crime, and that is the first analytic and diagnostic mistake that we made.
Yeah. Well, have you reached out to the school, to the MEC, to the education authorities that you're talking about, or are they speaking about these further claims?
That's a very good question. I reached out to one of the teachers whose name keeps cropping up in the book, and it's really interesting. I mean, I'm sitting here with the book in front of me, which is really worth reading. Remo Murapito. He wasn't prepared to speak to me, but Sam Cowen interviewed him, and his own wording indicts him in the book. You won't believe it, but when you read the book, Francis, as I know that you will, the man actually admits, for example, to slapping a pupil in his class, and then he has the audacity of trying to diminish his own legal and moral culpability by saying, given that the boy was one of the victims of Colin Rex, the boy was clearly provoking him by being essentially damaged goods, that is a bad boy in the class. So that tells you about the psychology of even a that is faulting the law. So it's incredible. I mean, the police should be going after this man and many of the other teachers, quite frankly. As for the school, I reached out to the current headmaster. He's back in his job magically, despite what happened at the beginning of this year with the grade 8 camp. That tells you about the lack of political will provincially to deal decisively with this school. But also, all they gave me is the same PR spin that they gave carte blanche a couple of weeks ago, and that they also gave the publisher of this particular book. And what that suggests to me, Francis, is there is no honest attempt to self-examine, to own up to culpability, and to walk the journey towards fundamentally reforming the school culture that can become anybody's.
All right, your line is breaking up. Let me see if I can throw in one very quick final question. Eusebius, Ms. Bossert was incredibly brave to come forward, although you spoke about, why she didn't come forward earlier. Do you believe she's in quite a vulnerable position right now?
She is in a vulnerable position, and I hope the line is holding, because this is an important moment in the story, Francis. There's also a disincentive for some of the adults in the school community to speak out. We are so vested as alumni of our institutions in the myth-making about how beautiful the schools are that we attended. We do like it when an adult breaks rank and says all is not well with our school, our university, our place of work. And she, for example, experienced the poisoning of her dog. I have seen photographic evidence of bruises on her body for being thrown down the stairs. She reported some of this to the police, and dockets had gone missing. And what that tells you is the extent to which toxic masculinity is part of the story. That you've got adult men who are so over-invested in the myth-making about their school's history that they are prepared to also make sure that they send a strong message to someone like a matron who wants to speak out that she had better think twice. I suspect she'll probably lose her job, and I suspect that as you and I are speaking, she probably is experiencing a lot of abuse.
Yeah. Sure. Well, thank you for talking about your exclusive this morning. Eusebius Mckaiser, author, analyst, and of course, a talk show host.